What do Runescape, EVE Online, and Team Fortress 2 all have in common? If you guessed trading systems, then you would have guessed correctly. In one way or another, they all have functioning economies. Now you might think that an economy is something that only a country has, but that's not really the case. Any entity can have an economy, and the virtual worlds of video games are no exception to this. Any game where users are able to trade each other in-game items is a game where a bustling economy is able to develop, and you'd be surprised how complex these economies can become. And these in-game economies can be worth millions upon millions of dollars. So let's talk about how these economies form, how they function, and how they are eerily good at mimicking the economies of the real world. The first thing any economy needs is a currency, because it's one thing having a whole bunch of cool weapons or whatever that people want to buy, but there needs to be a baseline item that all other items can be valued off of. In a lot of games with trading systems, the main currencies used are also currencies from the in-game world, like RuneScape's gold coins, or EVE Online's interstellar credits and plex, or Warframe's platinum. These are all things that can be used in various in-game stores or menus to buy stuff or level up or craft items or whatever, which makes their value to players extremely obvious. Players can use these currencies for various things in-game, which makes their use as a currency in trading with other players a no-brainer. But not every game's currency makes that much sense on the surface. Valve has 3 big games with trading economies: Dota 2, CSGO, and Team Fortress 2. These games haven't got any really obvious currency to speak of. There's no in-game currency that can be used to shop with, so instead they use things that can be easily bought directly from Valve. All 3 of these games use keys as a main currency. The keys used to unbox the in-game loot boxes are used as a currency to trade with other players. These keys might seem a little less obvious to use than the literal currencies used in other games, but they're still of obvious value to a player anyway. Unboxing loot boxes is obviously a thing that players might want to do. It's how new rare items are generated into the economy. But the most important thing that all of these currencies have in common is that their value is all somehow directly tied to real-world money. Keys can be bought from Valve from their in-game shop. In TF2, for example, this costs $2.50, or, you know, in real money, that's £2.15. This means that the currencies used to trade with other users, and to value in-game items, are inextricably linked to the value of the US dollar. And by extension of that, every single tradable in-game item is indirectly worth real money. And this is true of any game with a trading economy. RuneScape gold can be bought off the internet from gold farmers. Same thing goes for EVE Online's ISK. If it's worth real money, and it's tradable between players, then there's an incentive to sell it for real money over the internet. The functioning stock market of EVE Online allows you to generate ISK like you're a Wall Street hedge fund manager. And that's all well and good for our games with currencies that, like, actually make a little bit of sense, but for these games, you might notice something a bit odd. These currencies are very valuable. Items that aren't worth as much of a key are going to be hard to trade for using keys, right? Like, I can't buy an item worth 2 pennies if my smallest denomination is worth $2.50. So we need smaller currencies to be able to trade with. And in the case of Team Fortress 2, we also have metal. If the key is our dollar, then these 3 guys are the nickel, diamond, quarter of the economy. Because TF2 has nearly 200 unlockable weapons, and these items just drop passively to players as they play the game. If a new player wants any of these shiny unlockable weapons, there are multiple ways to get them. Method number 1 is to get it from a random drop for completely free. Method number 2 is to trade for it. And luckily for the noobs, these are mostly pretty cheap. Trading for these does require you to find a player to trade with, or it requires knowledge of a third-party site or server to trade on. But as long as you know about those, the unlockable weapons are pretty easy to acquire. If you don't know about those, then you're in a bit of trouble, since method 3 of acquiring these weapons is the in-game store. And the in-game store will happily scam the shit out of you for items that are worth a fraction of a penny in the trading economy. And method number 4 is crafting. TF2 has a crafting system, and it's had one for years. You can turn 2 weapons into 1 scrap metal, 3 scrap into 1 reclaimed metal, and 3 reclaimed metal makes 1 refined metal. And these metals can be used to craft all sort of items in the crafting menu. The problem is, trading for items is significantly cheaper than crafting them. TF2 has this entire economy built up around players trading with each other for items. The prices and rarities of these items in the in-game currencies has been well understood for years, and crafting is way more expensive in raw metals than just trading for exactly what you want with another player. So if you can craft as much refined metal as you want, but there's no real reason to destroy your refined metal, the amount of refined metal that exists just keeps on growing, which means that the value of each individual refined metal shrinks because of how abundant that metal becomes. In the real world, we call this inflation. when a government prints a lot of a currency, so the amount of that currency in circulation gets bigger, making the total value of a single unit of that currency go down. Comparing a funny piece of video game crafting material to real world money might seem stupid to you, but the items sold in Team Fortress 2, like we mentioned before, are literally worth real money. Refined metal is the unit of currency directly below the key, so it's incredibly important to the game's economy, but the value of refined metal just decreases as time goes on. Back in the day, a key was able to be bought for about 5 refined metal, but as time has gone on and the amount of refined metal crafted by players has skyrocketed, the cost of a key in refined metal has gone up by 10 times. It peaked at being worth over 70 refined metal. The way to fix this issue is conceptually very simple. There needs to be a sink for refined metal. There needs to be a valuable way for players to destroy their refined metal and get something in return. There are already ways to destroy refined metal. There are a bunch of crafting recipes that use refined metal. You can even destroy 3 refined in exchange for 1 random craft hat, but nobody ever does it, because like we said before, it ends up being much cheaper to just trade for what you want than to craft an item in this menu. So Valve would need to add a valuable reason to destroy refined metal into the game. Will Valve do this? Well, if they won't spend time fixing issues that literally make their game barely playable, then something tells me that they aren't going to fix TF2's trading economy either. But until some sort of sink gets added, the price of a key is going to endlessly climb. And bear in mind that TF2 is a first-person shooter. Games like Runescape have these huge bustling economies, but they make a little more sense. Trading gold for goods with other players thematically makes sense in a fantasy MMO. But TF2 is a first-person shooter that just so happens to have a trading system. It's likely that Valve never anticipated that their trading system would become such a big deal to players, so the idea of having profitable metal sinks never occurred to them. So in the state it's currently in, the game is going to have an irreversible inflation problem. But this problem's not unique to Team Fortress 2. Every in-game economy experiences inflation. In fact, a lot of games have it much harder than Team Fortress 2 does, because most of the currencies in these games are theoretically infinite. You can generate an infinite amount of gold in RuneScape. RuneScape gold is not a physical item. The game generates it on a ton of different player actions. So inflation in the real world requires some sort of government authority to print money to put into circulation to cause that inflation. But in RuneScape, any player can generate money just by going and killing a goblin or whatever. So millions of users are effectively printing money every hour of every day, constantly. So these games need a way to prevent this. RuneScape uses a Grand Exchange tax to take money out of the economy. The Grand Exchange is this huge trading hub in RuneScape, where players can list their items for sale so that other users can buy them. RuneScape introduced a 1% tax on all sales from the Grand Exchange in an attempt to slowly remove currency from circulation, because without methods like this, gold can be infinitely generated from selling to NPCs or killing enemies. They also added a whole bunch of item sinks, but there's way too many of those to actually talk about them all in this video. EVE Online has taxes too. The main form of taxes is corporation tax. A corporation is basically like a guild in World of Warcraft, but like way bigger. These corporations work basically like real-life countries, having defined borders, a realistic chain of command and leadership, standing militaries, industry, and of course, taxation. These taxes are used for a lot of things, but mostly they're used to fund huge-scale in-game wars with other corporations, which is cool and exciting, you know, space warfare in my space game is exactly what I'm looking for. So players are mostly happy to pay these taxes. These taxes are what gets EVE Online talked about in the news, so players love that shit. But that's not the only tax the game has, because the game has sales taxes, taxes that are one of the game's methods of curbing inflation. The company that makes the game takes a percentage of all money that passes through the various in-game trading hubs and stock markets and stuff, which can be very unpopular with the players, as you can imagine. You know, just like real taxes. But the funny part about EVE Online is that it's like a capitalist wet dream. The game is a ruthless, capitalistic society. So if players don't like taxes, they just create tax havens for themselves. You see, players can make their own trading hubs. The trading hubs that are run by the devs have this sales tax that can be all the way up to 5% on every single transaction. But players can build citadels, extremely expensive structures that can be placed basically anywhere in space, and they can have their own market exchanges inside. These market exchanges can have a tax rate of whatever the player wants. So if they set it to be slightly lower than the tax rate of the established exchange, they will steal away customers in droves. So the wealthy players build citadels on the outside outskirts of established trade hubs, and they undercut the market. But the thing is, any player with a few billion ISK can do this. So once a couple of dozen players start making these things, suddenly the tax rates in these citadels get pushed down further and further as competing citadels race to have the lowest tax rates to entice customers with. The hope being that if you're the last market exchange standing, you can raise your rates after all competition has died out to make crazy profits. But financial competition is not the only way that these exchanges could compete with each other, because unlike in real life, if two competing financial exchanges want each other gone, they can just wage war on each other. All they have to do is try and shoot the other guy's establishment out of the sky. These citadels and these wars surrounding them are of course funded by the megacorporations that most players are members of. The taxes that these corporations take are exactly what funds this warfare. And market exchanges are not the only cause of these wars. The biggest war in EVE Online's history was caused by in-game casino owners, because where there's an economy, there's gambling. The owners of the now defunct I Want ISK online casino funded a coalition of players to wage war on the biggest corporation at the time, the Imperium. This war literally cost hundreds of thousands of real-world dollars. Some of the ships used in this battle cost thousands of dollars each, and hundreds if not thousands of them can be destroyed in these wars. These wars, of course, funded by those taxes paid to the corporations by the users that make up their ranks. The developers eventually had to crack down on these casinos, because, you know, gambling bad and all that. But I'm sure you can imagine that people just found new things to wage war over all the same. But speaking of gambling, any game with in-game trading can and will have gambling, because gambling has the potential to make some people very, very rich. And in 2015, two YouTubers by the name T Martin and Pro Syndicate decided that they were going to get in on the money. They started doing gambling videos on their YouTube channels. They'd gamble on these popular CSGO gambling sites. The sites worked in a relatively simple way. You would give the website CSGO skins from your Steam inventory, and the site would give you a currency, basically casino chips. You would then bet those chips on esports matches or on gambling games like roulette wheels, and if you won, you would be given even more chips in return. You could then use your chips to buy back skins you wanted. So if you won big, you could trade in cheap skins for incredibly expensive ones. And as we've already established, CSGO skins are worth real money. Winning big on a CSGO gambling site allowed you to take your won skins to another grey market site and sell those skins for real money put directly into your PayPal account. The main site these two YouTubers were using was a site called CSGO Lotto, and as you can imagine, videos of your favourite YouTuber hitting it big on a CSGO slot machine was a fantastic advertisement for this website. But all of the fun had gambling by these two YouTubers wasn't all they made it out to be, because there was one catch. They both owned the website. It was all a scam. T Martin created the site in December 2015, and Pro Syndicate was a part owner, and this was never disclosed to the audience. It was technically public knowledge. Technically, you could go to the records of who started this company and find out. But the audience was never directly told this. It was kept a secret on purpose so that they could advertise their site without acknowledging their ties to it. And it was entirely possible that they were faking their wins in their YouTube videos to make the site more appealing to their audience. Although, to my knowledge, this was never conclusively proven to have actually happened. This was obviously a bad look. They were deceiving their audience for monetary gain. Not to mention the legality of these sites was debatable to say the least. They could get around the laws by saying that technically you aren't gambling for real money. And since Valve and Steam give you no way to directly trade these skins in for real money, it means that it's all fictional value. None of the money's actually real. But it was an open secret that you could very easily turn skins into real money elsewhere. And the people who owned these sites were making silly money doing this. And for all intents and purposes, they got away with it too. They avoided all jail time and weren't even fined a single penny, despite the fact that their gambling site was barely legal and they'd paid other YouTubers to gamble on their sites as advertisement. So these two guys made a pretty little penny off their very shady gambling business, and they got away with it scot-free. People make money from these in-game economies. These in-game economies represent big bucks for people savvy enough to exploit them. People literally work full-time jobs inside these in-game economies just to make a living, and no game is more familiar with this than the classic online MMO, Runescape. Runescape allows players to trade items with each other, and gold coins function as currency not only to buy from NPCs with, but also to pay other users for items. And the Grand Exchange acts as a hub for this. Players can list their items on the Grand Exchange like it's Runescape's very own eBay, so players don't even need to interact with each other to trade. The gold coins in Runescape are very valuable in-game, and this of course means that you can buy Runescape gold for real money over the internet. So you can probably see where this is going. If people are willing to pay users for in-game goods and services, then that means there's money to be made from playing video games and using clever tricks to make a profit. In old school RuneScape, gold farmers are infamous. You'll very often find accounts that stay in certain areas of the world for 8 to 10 hours a day, doing the same thing the whole time, whether it be killing a certain enemy or just mining a certain ore. And you can spot gold farmers by looking at their XP levels. They'll have minimum levels in anything except the levels necessary to do the task they're doing. Like this gold farmer, who has almost 45 million mining XP, which literally takes thousands of hours to reach. These players do not play the game for fun. They play the game as a job. And there's plenty of videos out there of people who have interviewed these gold farmers to ask them about how they do it and how much money they make. Like this gold farm in Venezuela. 5 or 6 people sat here gold farming for hours a day. And from their interview, you can learn that they make about 1 to 2 million gold an hour in the game. So you might be asking, well, how much is this gold actually worth? Well, it fluctuates daily, but on average, 1 million gold is worth 50 cents. 50 cents! Gold farming in RuneScape, which is their full-time job, makes them approximately 50 cents an hour. $1 an hour on a good day. This is crazy, right? That's so far below minimum wage. Why would anyone work such long hours at such tedious work for such a small amount of money?
Venezuela already has the world's highest inflation, and it looks like the economic crisis there is about to get even worse. The International Monetary Fund projects the country's inflation rate will rise to an incomprehensible 1,000,000%.
Meantime, the IMF says Venezuela's inflation could hit 1.37 million percent. I don't know what the hell that means. It just sounds scary.
They are lines that seem to go on forever. All across Venezuela, hungry children waiting to receive a meal.
The last 2 years have been devastating. A global pandemic threatening an already dire situation. With medicine, water, power, and fuel shortages, the virus was not the only thing Venezuelans feared. It's what came as a result. Hunger.
Venezuela's economy was heavily reliant on oil. Long story short, their economy was going great until there was a dramatic drop in the price of oil in 2015. Their government's solution to this problem was to borrow lots of money, then print lots of money to pay for that borrowed money. And this caused some of the worst hyperinflation that the world has ever seen, with their economy going into freefall and their currency being worth 54 million% less than it was before the crash. So now, the average wage in Venezuela is between $4 to $10 a month. A month. Being a Venezuelan gold farmer lets you make between $4 to $10 in a single day. So suddenly, this tiny amount of money makes a whole lot more sense. So these Venezuelan bot farmers use the cheapest equipment that they can get their hands on. And they grind for 10 to 12 hours a day, and they make 30 times the amount that the average worker in their country makes. And that is still almost 10 times less than minimum wage in America. So reality is, as poor as it might seem, gold farming in RuneScape is actually a lifeline to these people. Their living conditions are terrible by first world standards, but for the country they live in relative luxury, and every attempt Jagex makes to restrict the ability to gold farm is directly impacting these people's livelihoods. Games with functioning trading economies mimic the real world in very many ways. Where there's trade, there's also currencies, and full-time workers, and taxes, and wars, and gambling, and corporations, just like in the real world. And as funny as it might seem, your little in-game items can be worth real-world money. Some of the rarer ones being worth thousands upon thousands of real-world dollars. And these economies often get exploited for profit by bad actors and desperate people in more ways than you can possibly imagine. So whether it be an expensive TF2 backpack, a virtual casino trading virtual items, or a huge EVE Online corporation, some people sit on virtual gold mines looted from the free-to-play economies of dozens of popular online games. And this changes the face of the game, for better or worse, whether you like it or not. Thanks for watching.